Hi everyone. Last time we read, we ended right before chapter 15, and Candace's dad had just showed up and met Brandon, and Candace was about to head over to Brandon's house to watch the DVDs that they found on the Washingtons. So we'll start right up again on chapter 15. Candace followed Brandon through his house, then up a flight of creaky stairs. She clutched the DVD and the letter she had snuck just out of her bedroom. "Thanks for not saying anything to my dad," she said. "No problem." A long, narrow hallway greeted them on the second floor. Brandon banged on a door painted black. "Candace is here," he yelled. He turned to her. "Or do you prefer Candy?" She shook her head. "I hate that name." "Then why—" Brandon stopped as the door swung open. Tori brought her phone down from her ear and pressed it against her chest. "Sorry, got a mini emergency going on here. Stop by on your way out. I've got some vintage tees that'll probably fit you." "Okay, thanks," Candace said. Tori waved her pinky at them as she brought the phone back to her ear and closed the door. "Mom's been asking her to clean out her closet for months. You're lucky. There's some really good stuff in there, I guess." He walked to an open door at the end of the hallway. The room smelled like mothballs. "Like I said, the computer's really old." "It's okay." Candace sat on the edge of the small bed. As she patted the purple comforter, she considered the question Brandon hadn't finished asking in the hallway. Why did she let her father call her by a name she didn't like? Maybe it was for the same reasons Brandon hid his girl books. It was just easier that way. Candace looked up to see Brandon staring at her. "Ready to get started? I already booted it up." "Oh, okay." She handed him the DVD. "Did you try a search for James Parker yet? Or did you flip through the yearbooks to see if you could find him?" A confused look came across his face. "Of course not," he said. "I was waiting for you." The video tribute to Coach Washington was a little less than 10 minutes long. It mostly consisted of interviews with past teachers and students and a narration over old photos. There was no mention of the secret tennis game, and nothing at all seemed to relate to the first clue. Not until the last 30 seconds of the video. "Freeze it," Candace said. "That's the answer." Brandon stopped the video. "What, baseball?" "Well, it's at least part of the answer." Candace pulled out the letter. "The clue says Coach Washington idolized a team in another sport, other than tennis." Brandon rewound the video, then played it back. "Coach Enoch Washington loved many things," the narrator said. "First, baseball as youth, then track and tennis in college and beyond. But truly, it was his family he loved more than anything else in the world. They were his everything." Images of Washingtons floated across the screen. Seeing the pictures, Candace was positive that the girl in the tennis team photo was Siobhan. Brandon paused the video again. A black and white picture of the Washingtons remained on the screen. They stood in front of a brick building. Coach Washington wore a dark suit and a skinny tie. Siobhan and her mother wore long dresses and lace gloves. "They look so much realer now," Brandon said after a few moments. "I mean, I always thought they were real, but it's different now that we can see them. They're an actual family, real people, and they were run out of the city just because of the color of their skin." Candace nodded. She wondered what would have happened if they hadn't left Lambert. Maybe Siobhan would have become the first black city manager, not her grandma. Maybe the new high school would be named after Coach Washington. Brandon let the rest of the video play out. "Okay, so he loved baseball," he said once and ended it. "Now we need to figure out which team, right?" "The video said he lived in Texas until he moved to Alabama." "What city was he from again?" Candace asked. Brandon looked at his notes. "Luling, I think." He opened a browser and typed the name of the city. "It's pretty small." He ran another search, this time with Luling and baseball. "Looks like the high school had a baseball team." "Yeah, but he didn't go to the high school there, remember?" "Maybe the city had a Negro League team?" Brandon was already typing another search. He paused. "Ever heard of a guy named Biz Mackey?" He clicked on the link. "Any connection?" Brandon scrolled down the page. Mackey played on a team called the Luling Oilers in 1916. He played there for 2 years, then moved on to a different team. He was a Hall of Famer. Must have been really good. Coach Washington would have been, 8 years old in 1916? Candace slid to the edge of the bed so she could see the screen better. The Luling Oilers. That must be the answer. Candace bounced on the mattress, a smile wide on her face. This felt even better than solving one of her strategy games. At the rate she was going, she'd have this puzzle solved before the end of the weekend. After doing a little more digging on Biz Mackey and the Luling Oilers, they shifted their attention to James Parker. According to his Wikipedia page, Parker grew up in Mississippi. After leaving the military, he went into the engineering and construction business in Colorado, before branching into other industries and eventually becoming a multi-millionaire. He was a shrewd businessman, but he also gave a lot of money to charities and supported scholarships through his foundation. Then, one day without warning, he sold off all his stock and disappeared. He was eventually declared dead. He didn't have any relatives or a will, so the government absorbed all the assets they could find. Parker was estimated to be worth over $120 million, but the government could only locate half of that amount. Candace pointed at the screen. They couldn't find everything. She began to pace the room. That must mean that the rest of the money is hidden somewhere. Or maybe they just didn't find it. Stop being so skeptical. We're onto something here. But this doesn't have anything to do with the clue, Brandon said. Don't you think we should get back to reading about Biz Mackey or the Luling Oilers? Candace shook her head. I know it's not a clue, but it feels too important to ignore. Strategy games are like that all the time, intentionally misleading the reader. Maybe James Parker is the real mystery. She plopped back down on the bed. Plus, understanding the mind of a guy behind a mystery puts you that much closer to solving it. She read that in a detective book once. They kept searching the web for James Parker. Some websites added a few small details, but nothing substantial. Brandon sighed as he stood from the desk. I'll say this, he doesn't look like what I expected. I thought he'd look, well, crazy. He paused. Not that there's anything funny about mental illness, it's just... Don't worry, I know what you mean, Candace said. Crazy was one of the words her father absolutely hated, but Candace hadn't yet been able to get it out of her vocabulary. Plus, she agreed with Brandon. She had expected the letter writer to be a guy with a wild beard and unruly hair, like those men who lived in the woods and didn't use technology. But James Parker looked normal, for the most part. His black and white photo on Wikipedia page reminded her of Professor Xavier from the old X-Men movies. In other photos, where he had hair, it was short and white. He seemed to be more of a tan than pale, with freckles or faint sunspots on the bridge of his nose. He never smiled in any of his pictures. But it was his eyes that were the most striking. They were big and gray, round, angry, like he was daring someone a fight. There was a knock on the door. They looked up to see Tori holding a bag of clothes. Your mom called. She says it's time for you to come back home. It's been an hour already? Candace asked. More like an hour and a half. She peeked at the computer. Do we even want to know what you guys are up to? Thanks for the clothes. Brandon took the bag and softly nudged his sister out of the room. We'll be finished in a second. Okay, I'm heading to Claudia's, Tori said. And leave the door open. Mom's downstairs. Nothing's happening, Brandon said. I know, dummy, but the rules are the rules. Candace repeated Tori's words in her head. What did she know? That nothing was happening between them, or that Brandon was gay? Candace was thinking so much she almost dropped the bag of clothes when Brandon tossed it to her. Guess you'd better go. In a second. She put the bag on the bed and picked up a letter. Do a search for James Parker, Colorado, and Solera plant. Brandon typed the words in and began the search. We've got a hit. He scrolled through the article. Something called the Economic Development Commission was responsible for getting the plant to Denver, Colorado. Parker was the president of the board. He looked at Candace. They moved the plant from Lambert, South Carolina. See? Okay, I admit it. James Parker probably sent the letter. He leaned back and closed his eyes. We should go through the yearbook tonight. Maybe there's another clue there. I'll take the yearbook. Why don't you watch the video again and see if you can find anything? Call me as soon as you figure things out. He nodded. What about the Washingtons? We should probably do another web search for them, too. I already tried at home, Candace said. She had borrowed her mother's phone a few days before to try to find them on the internet. Nothing popped up, which is crazy given their names. Brandon snapped his fingers. Where's the yearbook? She handed it to him. What are you thinking, that we misspelled her name? No, looking for Siobhan's middle name. He found her name in the book. Siobhan Mildred Washington. He quickly ran the search online using her full name. I think I have something. It's a memorial page. He looked at the yearbook, then back at the screen. I'm pretty sure it's her. Candace studied the photo on the screen. The older version of Siobhan was grayer, with more wrinkles. Her mouth was twisted into a half smile, like she was hiding something. But not in a weird way, Candace thought. More like the woman in Mona Lisa. She worked at an elementary school. Brandon scrolled down. She was a librarian, but she got a degree in math first. Slow down, Candace said. She was trying to read quickly, but Brandon was a few sentences ahead of her. Sorry, I was just trying to skim ahead. What is it? She frowned. Just keep reading. His voice trembled. Candace leaned over Brandon's shoulder. Siobhan Washington had died from cancer. She had worked at an elementary school in Maryland for over 30 years, first as a math teacher, then as a librarian. Her favorite book was The Westing Game. So she didn't coach sports? Candace asked. I don't think so, Brandon said. Candace read even faster. Not married, no kids, loved puzzles and movies. She was buried in... Have you gotten to the part about her favorite book yet? He asked. The Westing Game? Candace stood upright. Yeah, I saw it. And? She shrugged. What's so special about that book? His eyes widened and his mouth dropped open a little. You like puzzle books, and you haven't read The Westing Game? He yelled. Candace crossed her arms. I'm standing right here. You don't have to shout. Sorry, he said softer, but still, you have to read it. It's awesome. There's so many twists in the book. And it's really funny. For a book written in the 70s, anyway. I think I have a copy if you want to borrow it. Okay, fine. I'll read it after I finish my puzzle books. A small part of Candace hated that Brandon was so enthusiastic about a book she had never heard of before. I wonder if it's a clue, Brandon continued. Maybe something in the book links back to the letter, or to Parker. Can you go to the bottom of the page? Candace spun her bracelet around her wrist. Maybe we can see who created the website. That way we'll know if it was Parker or not. Brandon scrolled down to the end of the webpage. Both Candace and Brandon sucked in their breath. The website didn't name who had created it, but it did list the date that it was updated. August 10th, 2007. The same date as the letter. Candace slowly sank to the bed. On second thought, maybe I'll take that book now. And we are going to stop right there before chapter 16. And I don't know if you guys have ever heard of the book The Westing Game, but I actually own it because it was my favorite book when I was a kid. And I actually haven't read it since like maybe 5th or 6th grade. So I decided to start rereading it again. And I totally forgot what the end of the book is and how the mystery works and everything. So it's super interesting. So if you have access to any books at all during all of this, I highly, highly, highly recommend that you read The Westing Game on your own. Here's it up close so you can look it up and let me know what you think if you already have read it.